Hello, it's great to see you. I'm Tracy Hamston from Meadows, and I'm really pleased to see that we've got a fantastic turnout for another one of our talks. We've got 290 people registered, which is just amazing. Tonight, we're really delighted to be kicking off our first event of 2026 with a talk on creating and restoring flower-rich grasslands by Katey Stephen from Natural England. Over the coming months, we'll also be running a range of practical and inspiring events. So we've got plug planting workshops, plant identification sessions, the ever popular scything workshops, and of course our annual Open Meadows events. So in terms of our talks, the next online talk after this one will be later in the year, which is by Professor Carl Sayer on the fascinating subject of ghost ponds. So full details of all the talks are available on the website's events page, and you can also join our mailing list to receive regular newsletters and updates. So now on with what you've all come to listen to. So I'm really delighted to welcome tonight's speaker, Katey Stephen from Natural England. Good evening, Katey.
Good evening.
Katey, yeah, hi. Katey took up her role as Senior Grassland Specialist at Natural England in 2020. She previously worked for many years as a lead advisor in the West Midlands, where she was responsible for grassland and woodland SSSIs, that's sites of special scientific interest, and that was across Hereford, Worcestershire and Gloucestershire. And she led the designation of the Lowland Hampton Meadows SSSI, which was a series of extensive floodplain meadows on the edge of Hereford. Throughout her career, Katey has developed a wide-ranging expertise in grassland ecology, with a particular emphasis on botanical survey, habitat management and site designation. So all pretty impressive stuff. So I'm really looking forward to the talk. I would say as we go along, please put your questions into the chat box in YouTube. We've got plenty of time for those at the end, and we'll have a Q&A session that will endeavour to get to as many questions as we can after Katey's talk. So without me chatting on anymore, I'm going to hand over to Katey, and yeah, thanks very much.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much. It's delighted to be here this evening. So yes, I'm based in Worcestershire, one of a very meadows-rich county, but I've been down to visit the Moors Meadow project and find it an incredibly exciting project. So it's delighted to be here to talk to you tonight about this. So I just go through what I'm going to talk about tonight. So before we get on to the restoration and creation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of species-rich grasslands, and then I'm going to go through a few examples as well of different types of species-rich grasslands you might come across, and then talk about, you know, what should we be restoring, what should we be restoring to, and then I'll go through the grassland restoration techniques and the creation techniques, and we can cover a lot of those in questions as well, I think, and the ongoing management of these grasslands once you've restored them. And then I'll touch a little bit on monitoring at the end as well. So first, what is a species-rich grassland? This is what comes to mind. This picture is what comes to mind when we think of a species-rich grassland. Just look at that. Just look at the number of different plants in there, the different colours of the flowers, the different grasses that are in there. This is an iconic feature of our landscape. They've been part of British farming landscape for over 1,000 years. And today we recognise them as valuable habitats for the wildflowers that are in them, but they're important for pollinators, for butterflies, moths, insects, birds. I mean, just look at this picture. It's incredible. So there's evidence historically of widespread diverse grassland such as this since the Iron Age, since the domestication of animals, and, you know, the use of land for farming. They probably in those days there'd have been glades with species found in, you know, glades in the middle of woodlands where you'd get these sort of species, open areas in woodlands. We also know there's been evidence of haymaking since Roman times. So, you know, this is a very ancient field management. The problem started coming around the 1940s. When we needed increased food security, and we had mechanization of farming, we had herbicides, pesticides, commercial pressures, political incentives, and that unfortunately has led to the decline of these semi-natural grasslands. In the 1970s, I'm afraid a lot of those pressures increased and that just accelerated, and I'm afraid the demise of these meadows has continued today. So that's why it's so important that we have meadow groups like yours that are promoting management and restoration of these grasslands. So exactly what are they? We call them, this is a bit jargony, I suppose, but we call them semi-natural grasslands that haven't been reseeded or heavily fertilized. So they're quite nutrient poor, the soils. They've been maintained by traditional management. Generally, that would have been a hay cut with an aftermath graze. An aftermath graze is after you've cut the hay in late July, you let the grass grow up again over the rest of July and August. Come September, October, you've then got a new flush of grass. At that point, you put stock on again. That fresh flush of grass is called the aftermath. So we say traditional management is a hay cut with aftermath grazing. Some of them are also managed by extensive grazing, so very low pressure grazing, but we'll come to those separately as well. They tend to be different grasslands than the one we're looking at in this picture here. These grasslands contain a very high diversity of native wildflowers, grasses, sedges, and other plants. Generally, we tend to say a species-rich grassland will have at least 15 species per square metre. But quite often that's up to 40 plus species per square metre. When you've got your square metre there, if you look down from above, you will see that in these grasslands, there will be over 30% cover of wildflowers versus the actual grasses in there. So if you look down, the wildflowers, those broad leaves, you will see will cover about at least 40% of those of the area that you're looking down on, and the grass will be a small component. Compare that to a fertilized field, a ley as we might call it. You know, if you look down on those, you might get some white clover, a few buttercups, but it's mostly grasses. This these grasslands are not like that. The other element of them is that they have a wide variety of grasses. You only have to look at this picture. Look at all the different seed heads you can see in there on the grasses. They always should have a low cover of white clover, ryegrass, and creeping buttercup. Those are things that respond a lot better to fertilizers, and you will see an element of those in these fields, but they will not be dominant. And as we'll see in a minute, different types of these species-rich grasslands, as we call them, are not always species-rich. We'll come to that in a minute. So why are these grasslands important? I'm going to take this in a four-pronged way. Let's talk about biodiversity first. Plants. The general assemblage of species in these grasslands, in these neutral grasslands, the general assemblage of species is the important thing. You don't necessarily get really rare stuff in them, but it's having this combination of species that is so uncommon and unusual. You do get some plants, for example, the first slide on my talk there showed green-winged orchids. They're quite uncommon, and you get some of these meadows that are just a carpet of green-winged orchids in the spring. If you're looking at more calcareous soils, you do get rarer plants, but generally it's this just general assemblage of really good stuff. Insects. Again, it tends to be generalist insects in here, but you go into a meadow like that in the summer and it's buzzing. The importance is the setting of it. You've got the species-rich variety of plants, but you've got the hedges around these fields, all important for insects, for nectar, for pollen. And the only other aspect of the insects that I would say is a real feature of these grasslands is anthills. What we refer to as lumpy, bumpy meadows. You can probably imagine these meadows where you get anthills covering them. If they're not being cut regularly, if they're being grazed more, you get these anthills developing. Red meadow ant that is a sign that this could be a really good meadow. Another aspect is fungi, and I'm not going to go massively into fungi here because I know my colleague, the other grassland specialist at Natural England, Sean Cooch, gave a fantastic talk late last year on waxcaps. Waxcap grasslands. These grasslands support a wide variety of waxcaps that look like little jewels in the autumn. Birds. Again, generalist in the sort of meadows I just showed you, but if you think more widely onto floodplain meadows, they're really important for breeding waders, things like curlew, for example. Soils. These meadows are on very old soils. And actually, I would say the soils are probably the most important part of these meadows. The fancy stuff that you see on top is a byproduct of having these very old soils with microfauna in them, mycorrhizal component, and generally the general soil health, so the structure of the soil. The soils will be species poor. That's a thing that's just one of those things that happens with these meadows. You won't get these meadows on nutrient-rich soils. And then the other part is links to other habitats. So if you imagine a lot of these meadows, they might be isolated within the farmed landscape. If you think of these, they're a link to other habitats. You think of these meadows and the hedgerows that go out to them. They link into woodlands nearby. They link into wet areas nearby. They're really important within the countryside. I'll now go on to historical and cultural importance of these meadows. As I said before, we have evidence that these have been around since the Iron Age. And this traditional management is, it's part of our history. It's an important part of our cultural, historic making in this country. The traditional management is part of that as well. The hay cut with the aftermath grazing, that has cultural implications as well. The shaping of the landscape. Quite often these meadows are odd shapes. If I'm looking at an aerial photo and I've got a question about a site, and I look at aerial photos and I see a set of fields that are really different shapes, I think, right, this is interesting. This could be something really interesting here in terms of species-rich grassland. You don't tend to get, you know, the sort of landscape you've got perhaps in the east of the country where you've got massive geometrically square fields, you know, that are heavily under heavy industrial agriculture. And this shapes our landscape as well. Stand back and look at a landscape with these meadows in, and it looks completely different to these, you know, mass agricultural fields. Archaeological interest. Quite often you will get ridge and furrow in them. You quite often get archaeological remains underneath. If you look at aerial photos, for example, you might see the remnants of medieval villages underneath. So again, there's an importance there that these are kept from the plough because the archaeological remains are so important underneath. So services, I probably better crack on with this and we'll get on to some restoration in a minute. Services, I've listed them there. I've listed a whole list of them there. More and more we're talking about carbon storage, flood, pollution control, soil health, natural function. These are all things we're talking about currently. Natural function I probably just should touch on because people might not know what that's about. This is about sort of naturalizing the landscape we have, you know, making sure that the hydrology is working as well as it possibly can, that ditches are working as well as they can, etc. And there's an ambition that we are working towards this in the landscape now. Public enjoyment. You know, how much pleasure does it give people when they come to your Meadows days to see these fantastic grasslands? Yes, then on to the loss. So you've probably all heard of this figure. 97% of our grasslands have been lost since the last war to improvement, ploughing, reseeding, fertilizers, inappropriate grazing. That figure is a figure from the 1980s. The loss is far greater than that. We are at least 98% now, and the loss continues. You know, people want larger fields. There's been a reduction in stock in the countryside. It makes these land use changes make it more difficult to manage these fields, and the economics of it as well. You know, it's not that productive to manage grasslands like this financially. Agri-environment schemes have helped, but they've not stemmed the loss. Right, let's go on to some brighter stuff now. So I'm just going to go through the different grassland types. Oh, by the way, that's a green-winged orchid. If any, it's a varied coloured one. They come in all sorts of different colours, purple through to white. They're fantastic, that I was talking about earlier. So we broadly talk about having 6 different grassland types, and I'm only going to talk about the ones I've put in bold here because I think they apply to Devon, which is more applicable to you. So quickly run through lowland calcareous grassland. You tend to get, you know, on downland in the south of the country. You get it up in Yorkshire, etc. I'm not going to detail. Fantastic grassland, incredibly species rich, incredibly important for its variety of orchids. Lowland meadows. Now these are the species rich ones we're talking about. They break down into 2 different types. I'm only going to talk about the drier one today, the one that we saw in the photo earlier. But also lowland meadows encompasses floodplain meadows. These are the ones that will flood in, that are underwater at the moment, and drain off in the spring, and then they come up with fantastic species-rich grasslands, so Snake's Head Fritillary, Greater Burnet, that sort of thing. But I'm not going to go into detail on that tonight. That's a whole other night's talk. Lowland dry acid grassland. Now that's a big mouthful. This is what we call them. That's basically grassland on more acidic soils. I'll talk about that a bit more. Purple moorgrass and rush pastures, wetter grasslands. I'll talk about that in more detail. Upland hay meadow, nothing to do with Devon. We get that up in Northumbria, North Yorkshire, Teesdale, Swaledale, just in the uplands. And then a thing called Calaminarian grassland, which is basically grassland on lead waste from mines. I know you probably do have these in the area, but I'm not going to go into the detail tonight because, to be honest, you can't do a lot of management on them. Nobody wants to put their stock where there's lead. So it's more about scrub clearing normally and rabbit grazing. Anyway, without further ado, I will go on to Lowland Meadows. So I put a map in here of England. I'm afraid my maps all stop at the Welsh and Scottish borders. You do get Lowland Meadows there as well. It's just I work for Natural England, so my maps all seem to stop there. So you can see there's quite a concentration down in your area. These Lowland Meadows, you find them on neutral soils. They tend to be enclosed field systems in the farmed landscape, and we only have 6,000 hectares of this left in the country. It's incredibly scarce. They're very floristically rich, wide range of grasses and herbaceous species. As I said, starting at about 15 species per meter square, but, going up to 40 plus per meter square. And as I said before, they're important feeding areas for birds, such as the meadow pipit, for bats, for small mammals, such as the field vole, and for insects, including species such as the shrill carder bee and the meadow ant. As I say, they're managed as hay meadows, which means a hay cut in July with an aftermath grazing. They are highly fragmented, with, we think, 80% of these sites are less than 5 hectares in size. Some of the ones that I come across, they're about 0.5 of a hectare. They are, they're very small and really fragmented within the countryside, so highly threatened. You get concentrations of these meadows in my home county of Worcestershire, in Kent and Somerset and Sussex. The general interest is in the field, but quite often these are in old landscapes, and the hedges, as you'll see in the picture there I have, they tend to have, they're at their best when they are surrounded by hedges, thick hedges that support the bird life, support the insect life, etc. So I just wanted to show you the indicator species of having lowland meadows. I've listed them there down the side. I can send some lists out with these on after the presentation that I think will come out to you with the recording. But these are if you've got these species, things like knapweed, cowslip, ladies' bedstraw, bird's-foot trefoil, those are indicators that you've either got this species-rich lowland meadow, or you've got something that could be. You can see also from that top right picture, again, look at the different number of seed heads on those grasses. The variety of grasses that you get in these meadows is, important factor of them. But when we're doing recording and things, we tend to stick to these herb species, indicator species, rather than going down the grass route, because not everybody wants to go out there and start identifying grasses. Not everybody is quite as sad as me, who loves grasses and wants to do that. And again, some of these meadows you will get the wax caps in as well. Right, lowland dry acid grassland. That's a mouthful. That's what we call it. But basically, these are grasslands on more acidic soils. So you get them on sort of hard acid rocks, which is probably around you, or superficial deposits of sand and gravels. You get concentrations of these in the east of the country. So in Norfolk, in the Breck country, you get concentrations of these. New Forest, the Thames Basin, upland fringes. So here you're probably getting it in the upland fringes on the edge of Dartmoor, Exmoor. The top picture here shows it where you get it on the sandy soils. Now, on those you tend to get, this is a very dry sort of acid grassland community that you're probably not going to find as much, where the important things there are the spring ephemeral species like shepherd's cress, but it's the lichens and mosses, which you can see in that picture, which are so important. And of course, that bare soil for insects, incredibly important. But the ones that you're probably going to find are the other three pictures here that I've got. I mean, those two, the two of them are just great stonking anthills, covered in species there. Again, oh, my map has gone over the Welsh and Scottish borders here. I don't know quite how I've achieved that, but there we are. There's the distribution of these grasslands. Again, you can see them associated with the upland fringes and, you know, in the country. These communities tend to be a lot more species poor. I said earlier, they're not always species rich, these grasslands. These can actually be quite species poor. So the important thing here is for us to have a look at those indicator species to see whether we've actually got this grassland. That by no means doesn't mean that the soils are any less important. You know, the soils are going to be old soils. It's just because they're on slightly different soils, that's what can grow there. These tend to be managed by grazing. They don't tend to be managed as meadows, so you don't tend to have a hay cut, hence you're getting the anthills in here. And again, incredibly important for wax caps. So if we just look here at the indicator species of these grasslands, the list is a lot shorter, but you know, if you're talking about harebell, heath bedstraw, ladies bedstraw, heath speedwell, pignut, sheep sorrel, quite often later in the year it will just look a sea of red, as it does in my one of these pictures on the left, the most left-hand picture here, of the sheep sorrel as it turns red later in the season. Purple moorgrass and rush pastures. Now these are wet. They tend to be on springs and flushes and seepages, on valley slopes, and you get them in floodplains as well. A little bit more of these, about 10,000 hectares of these. You get them on acidic to calcareous peat and mineral soils where you've got a fluctuating water table. Tend to, in England, to have concentrations of these in the west and the north. So there's concentrations in Devon and Cornwall, New Forest, and we also get them in the Norfolk Broads. They are species rich, and you know, habitats, when we say they're in favourable condition, you can have 15 to 40 species per metre squared. Again, very important for insects, and they tend to be grazed. So here's a list of the indicator species. Purple moorgrass, which is this tall one at the top on the left-hand side, can dominate these. But when you get into them, and if they're well managed, you know, you find all sorts of things in there. You know, devil's bit scabious is a key plant that we find in there. Meadow thistle, marsh valerian, ragged robin. You know, they are very rich. And of course, waxcap grasslands. As I said, I'm not going to go into this, but just look at those jewels of the autumn. Well worth going out to look for. UK supports some of the most important examples in Europe, and the waxcap grasslands in this country are of global significance. They can be on any type of grassland, but they tend to be the richest when they're on acid and neutral types. And actually, when you get on these grasslands, they might actually look quite species poor if you look at them at any other time of year. So you might not get the variety of species. They might look like a semi-improved grassland. So don't dismiss it before you've been out in the autumn and had a good look. Now this is more poignant for the talk coming on restoration and recreation. It's another jargon term, good quality semi-improved grassland. So this is grassland. I'm going to talk about two types here. It might be a degraded species-rich grassland, or it might be a grassland that has the potential to enhance to a species-rich grassland. So if you look at my photo on the left-hand side there, that's a grassland that I visited near me. And I know historically that used to be a species-rich grassland, slightly acid soils there, but it's been undermanaged. The gorse has come in, the scrub has come in, and in itself, yes, that provides good habitat. But because of what it's growing on, a lot of the indicator species are being sort of starved out. So there's potential in there to get on there and restore that to its former glory. And we'll talk about how you can do that later on, you know, removing the scrub, etc. My picture on the right is another grassland site that is a semi-improved grassland that my local wildlife trust have just bought, and they are restoring it to a species-rich grassland. Now, if you look there, you haven't got the species diversity that we had in the photos earlier, but with under restoration, that is achievable. We'll come to the details of why that is achievable later, but at the moment, that's not species-rich grassland. It will have some of the indicator species in when you walk through. So if you start seeing things like meadow buttercup, knapweed, bird's foot trefoil, red clover, waxcaps, you know that alarm bells start ringing and you think, oh gosh, we could do something with this. This might be worth investigating further. I've just taken a snapshot here and I will send the link to this website. A lot of you probably will know about it. This is called Magic Maps. It's a government website, and on there you can pull up a layer which shows what we call the priority habitat, grassland priority habitats. Basically, that's these different grassland types I've just been talking about. I've done a snapshot of a part of Devon here, just to show you what is there and what the potential possibly could be. So the light pink on there is this good quality semi-improved. That is potential for restoration, those grasslands, and look how widely distributed they are through that area. The lowland dry acid grassland is a sort of pale pink peachy colour. There's a tiny bit right in the centre there. Again, you know, that's probably on slightly higher ground. The lowland meadows, that's our species-rich neutral grassland. There's barely any on that shot, and where they are tiny. So but when I say there's barely any, there are actually, you probably, if you look closely, there are quite a few on there, but they are tiny. You know, they're so distributed through the landscape, and you know, the potential for joining those sort of things up. And the dark purples, the purple moorgrass rush pasture. This snapshot's probably a bit topographically low for that to show. You can see some up in the north of the map there. But I just give you a snapshot, and it's quite fun to play around with these maps to see what's what. There's all sorts of features on there like protected sites, etc. So I'll send you a link to that tomorrow. Right, let's get on to meadow restoration and creation. So the first thing is, before you start doing anything, this is a lot of work. This is potentially a lot of cost. So do your research first. The first and the most important thing to do is to talk to the landowner, the land manager, and make sure they're up for this. Are they dedicated to doing this? It's not a quick process. So you've got to be sure that they're in for it, for the long haul, and that they're happy to do this work. Have they got the machinery? Have they got the stock? Have they got the time to do this? Because they're going to have to manage it at a certain time of year. The failure of most restored or created grasslands is because people stop managing it as they should. So that's the most important thing I would say at the beginning. Talk to people and get everybody on side. So the next thing to do is what is on the site now. Have a look at do a survey of the grassland. Have a look what you've got there. Is it degraded priority habitat? Is it degraded species rich grassland like I've just talked about? Have you got scrub coming in? Is it rank and it's lost a lot of its interest but still has some indicator species? Or is the potential to enhance it? What has it always been like this? But there's a few things there that indicate maybe, you could make it even better. As I say, look out for the indicator species, the meadow buttercup, common knapweed, bird's foot trefoil, red clover, etc. Also, what is in the vicinity? It's so much easier to restore a site if you've got a seed source nearby. Also, if you've got stock that can walk between fields and bring seed in and things, that's potentially of use and things. Have a look at the wider landscape, see what's there. If you've got other species rich neutral grasslands in the area, maybe it's appropriate to take it back to that. Or have you got purple moorgrass rush pasture? Maybe you should be looking at that. Have a look in the vicinity. Understand the history of your site as well. So have a look at this magic maps, and you can have a look to see how it's been managed in the past. When did it appear as this species rich grassland? Have a look at Google Maps, for example. Google Earth, you can go back in time on aerial photos to see what has happened to that field in the past, and you can take it back about 30 years. You might go back 10 years and see it was an arable field, in which case you're looking at a different way of restoring than if you go back 30 years and you still see it looking pretty much as it is today. So those, again, I'll send these links through. So that magic is useful to look at, and Google Earth. So in terms of site selection, one of the most important things is to look at the soils and the pH of the site. We say that ideally the phosphorus levels, get a soil test done. The phosphorus levels should be between 0 and 1 before you start thinking about restoring the grassland. You'll be throwing good money after bad if you try and introduce a lot of these species and the phosphorus levels are over 1. What you need to do first is get those phosphorus levels down. And that means that you probably might need to nutrient strip before starting to restore the meadow. So to nutrient strip the soils, the best way to do it is to cut and remove it several times a year. So if you cut it in high summer and cut and remove the cuttings off, and then do it again later in the year and cut and remove, and soil test it again to see if you've got those fertility levels down to a level where you can start taking this forward as a restoration site. Don't apply any fertilizer. You're trying to remove the nutrients there. Remember, when you're taking these soil samples, the soils might have been altered by various sort of agricultural activities like liming and things like that. Talk to the land manager, ask them what has happened in the past. They are the people that understand the land. They will have been farming it, and just get a real understanding of what has happened on that site before. The other thing to look at is the pH. So that will basically tell you what sort of grassland you want to restore it to. So if it's more acidic, you might be wanting to go with the acid grassland mixes. If it's more calcareous, likewise. If it's neutral, you'll probably be going for the neutral ones. So you need to understand what the pH of your soil is as well. So you need to understand also any stresses that might apply to the site. So look at the slope. If it's on a steep slope, it might drain very well, it might drain too quickly, might be difficult to manage with machinery. So just take all that into account when you're looking at the site for restoration. The aspect will play a feature as well. You know, if you've got a nice sunny southerly facing bank, you're more likely to get different species growing than you will do on a northerly, slightly more shaded bank. Is it drought tolerant? Is it waterlogged? Just understand those stresses as well. Might vary the seed that's coming in or the plants that come in, depending on those stresses. And again, as I say, understand the proximity of other semi-natural habitats nearby. You know, have you got seed sources nearby? Understand this meadow in a landscape context. You know, are there other meadows in the area? Are there woodlands in the area that you can link into? Are there hedgerows that you can link this meadow into the landscape to? So that will give you a really good idea of where to think about restoring these grasslands. Other features you need to consider, you know, absolutely do your research on the historic or archaeological interest of these fields. You do not want to be damaging those in any way. And also check if you've got species of interest there already, you know, understand what you're managing for. One of the other important factors is the weed burden. The weed burden can be a real pain when you're first starting to restore these sites, and can cost a lot of money and be quite timely. So try and get on top of any weed burden that you have initially, you know, like creeping thistle or ragwort or docks. Get on top of that before you start any restoration, or if at all possible, if you've got the choice of one or other site, try and choose a site that's not got an existing weed problem. So this is just a summary of what I'm going to go through next. These are different ways of restoration. I'll go through all these individually, but it's just a bit of a summary of what I'm about to go on to now. The first option is always one you should consider first. It's the most cost effective and the cheapest to do. Change the management. Maybe that site has just not got the management that quite suits the species-rich grassland. You know, you might reduce the grazing to allow the seeds to set later in the summer. Maybe the site hasn't had hay cuts on, or, you know, hay cut with arisings removed. It might not have had the aftermath grazing. Look at the site and say, has this been managed as a traditional meadow? Maybe if we change the management, actually, that might be all we need to do. You might, you know, remove fertilizer or slurry applications. That could be the easiest thing to do, and that's a win-win. The second option I'm going to talk about here is natural regeneration. This is also very cheap, but it's easy to do. It will be slow, but it will work. It should work. So basically here I'm talking about just open up the gates to, if you've got a species-rich grassland next door, open the gates between that one and the other grassland and allow the livestock to do your seeding for you. They'll move the species, you know, from the species-rich site to the less rich site. It's cheap, it's easy. Well, it's probably not cheap, but, you know, it's easy. If you've got the stock anyway, it's cheap. So if you open up the gates between June and August to allow access between the fields, that will help spread the seed. Obviously, if you're doing this, you probably wouldn't be taking a hay cut, because you need those seeds to be there to get caught on the stock. Keep stock numbers low for this. You don't want them churning up the place. Now, I have to apologise for my slides of restoration. I've realised that I need to go out this summer and get some more photos. Older photos don't actually do well on big screens, but my apologies for that. Green hay. So green hay is where you cut an existing species-rich grassland early, whilst it's still green, whilst the seed hasn't fallen out of the seed heads, and then you transport it to the grassland that you want to restore, and you spread it out there. That sounds very easy, but there's key things that you have to do here to ensure that it actually takes. So the first thing is you've got to find a donor site. I would always recommend finding a donor site that is nearby, as near as you can get, definitely within your landscape. I would find it, because then you've got the right species coming in to your site. If the donor site is a site of special scientific interest, you will need permission to take green hay off there. So that will need to be sought from Natural England. But, you know, it is done, but you just need to speak to your local advisor to get permission to do that. So basically, first thing you need to do is prepare the site where the green hay is going to go. And you need to ensure that you've got, it varies who you talk to actually, but I would say at least 50% bare ground before you import the green hay. So the way you create this is you will cut it very low, and you can scarify. You can use chain harrows or tiny harrows to scarify the soil. A word of warning here with scarifying: you may need to get this, if you harrow it, you're going to need a screening decision under environmental impact assessments from us to do that. We are trying to get the regulations changed on that for when it's being used for restoration, but at the moment you need to be careful, and you need to just check whether you can, you've got permissions in place to do that first. So once you've got this bare ground there, it's waiting there for the seed to come in. So you cut your green hay before it goes to seed. You remove the material immediately. You do not want the seed to fall out on the way over to your site, and you don't want the cuttings that you've taken to heat up in any way. So if you heat them in any way and they start heating up, the seed will become non-viable. So I recommend that you actually get it to site and spread it within about 1 to 2 hours, if at all possible. It gets hot really quickly. The spreading ratio is 1 hectare of hay cut to 3 hectares of area that you're putting it on. So it's 1 to 3. Don't overharvest good sites. We recommend that you don't collect from the same area every year. And in any one year, don't collect off more than 1/3 of the site, so that you've got 2/3 of the site that you're collecting off that is just allowed to behave as a normal hay meadow. Generally, when it's spread out, if you've got low levels of it, you don't necessarily have to remove it after you leave it on the ground for about 3 weeks, and you don't tend to have to remove it if there's not much of it, because it tends to blow away. If you find after 3 weeks there's quite a lot there, get on and remove the arisings that are still there, because you don't want them to create a mulch and kill the stuff underneath. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is brush harvesting. So this is basically where you go out and you collect seed from the good sites with special equipment, with brush harvesters. There are companies that do this. There are wildlife trust, NGOs, etc. They will collect seed harvest. Meadows groups will as well. One of the key things here is actually finding someone who's got the machinery to do it. As I say, you know, local partners and meadow groups, etc., might own that sort of machinery. I'm not sure whether your group does or not, but it's worth asking around. The key thing is to match your donor site to the recipient site. So the soil types need to be right. If you've got a neutral site, you need to be collecting from a neutral site, so the species will be the same. There's a variety of ways of harvesting. You can do it with these machines, and you can go in throughout the season to get the full range of species. So if you imagine, some species will go to seed very early, some will go very late. it's not always possible to collect throughout the season, and so you're usually going for a happy medium, and some of those later species you're probably going to have to rely on getting into your sward in a different way. Collect in dry weather, so that you can get the seed easily. You can hand collect seed. There's various devices you can use. Sort of an inverted leaf blower can be used to collect them. If you want to get particular species, you might want to go in and do that hand collection. If you're missing them in your main collection, you can go back in and hand collect smaller amounts of specific stuff. You can dry out this seed, store away from rodents in a cool place. You can put in containers. Just make sure it doesn't succumb to condensation when it's being collected. But here, you have got a bit of a delay then to, you haven't got to get it on within 1 to 2 hours like green hay. You have got a bit more time to play with. And it should be scattered onto the prepared site, not drilled in. Make sure you get it as close to the soil as possible. A lot of these wildflower seeds are very small and will blow away quite easily. Use what machinery you can to spread it. Muck spreader I've heard being used. Various ways of getting it out there. If you are collecting seed off a site, you do need a license, and again I can send the links to where you get this license. It's called a seed preservation license to collect seed off site. I will send all that tomorrow for you. Brush harvesting versus green hay. Different people say it, which is best. Both increase species richness. Overall, I've witnessed green hay being the better one. It produces better results. I don't know why. There's advantages and disadvantages to both, availability of machinery, timing of operations, distance to donor sites, and, storage of material. It's swings and roundabouts, I think, really. So using UK native seed, this is a term that's branded around. I mean, this tends to you're probably not going to be buying in seed unless you're doing large arable reversion sort of sites, which I'll talk about a bit more in a bit. If you are using seed, match the seed mixes to the soils you've got and the moisture content and the location you're in, and check for non-natives in the mix. Do not ever use commercially grown seed on sites of special scientific interest, or old meadows that are already good. Be very careful where you get your seed from. There are commercial outfits there that aren't necessarily UK provenance. So there's a few terms here that you probably need to look at when you're buying in seed. So UK provenance is one of them. They should all be of known UK provenance, but be aware, as I say, some seed firms, they say they grow them here, but the seed might have originally come from abroad. Just double check where the seeds come from. British and native origins, another one. That means it's directly seed harvested mixes. So the methods I talked about before, brush collected or green hay collected. Local seed origin usually means it's from your same sort of character area, so the same sort of landscape as you. And so again, that is a good thing to use. So generally, all these ways of restoration, the green hay, the seed harvested, etc. The things they've got in common, you've got to prepare your site for these. So the key thing is the weed control, cutting, grazing, and cutting, grazing, and the use of herbicide if absolutely necessary. The timing to put seed on the soil is early August to mid-September, unless it's green hay, which has got to go on earlier. As I said, you've got to get a fair amount of bare ground showing, and have a very short sward before it goes on. Sorry, my photos again. I will sort this out this summer. Again, seed is broadcast to onto the surface. You can use a sort of fertilizer spreader, grass seed box, drill, slug pellet applicator I've heard of used, or do it by hand. The quantity of seed that you need to go on, I've written down there, is 5 to 10 kilograms per hectare of grass and wildflower seed, with the wildflower component of it being at least 10%. If it's arable reversion, though, you need 15 to 20 kilograms per hectare. Seed slotting. Now, this isn't much used. I have seen it used, and I don't know if I'm a fan. This is basically where you use specialist equipment to sort of drill in the seed. You tend to get lines of the seed. I've seen it on sites where it started to spread out after some years, but I'm not. You can use a lower seed rate here, 1 to 2 kilograms per hectare, and so that's the advantage there. But I'm mentioning it, not a massive fan there. Now, plug planting. This is interesting. This is really labour intensive. It's a supplementary method, I would say. So, if you've got difficult species, ones that flower later in the season that you can't really collect from the other methods, like devil's bit scabious or great burnet or something, or scarce or expensive seed, or if you need a specific food plant to go in, collect the seed and from other sites and grow it on. I've seen projects where they've had sort of people who've got lovely greenhouses growing on the seed for people, and then you take them out to your meadows and plant them. You will get a high mortality rate with this. You've got drought, slugs, rabbits, competition, everything. They need babysitting a bit, really. Plant in the autumn in open ground with a short sward, and check regularly if they need watering. If you get an autumn and winter like this year, you'll be okay. Well, they may well be underwater, but they'll be well watered. And reduce the competition before they go in, so sort of cut it. And it's quite a good thing to get groups to do. It's quite a good community sort of exercise, this. The use of yellow rattle, I just need to mention this. So yellow rattle, as I'm sure you all know, is hemiparasitic on grasses. So it knocks back all the chunky grasses, all the grasses that are a bit the bullies, and gives all the herbs a chance to get through. It allows the wildflower species to really get established, and you can use it on sites with higher phosphate levels, and it might well help reduce the phosphorus levels on the grasslands. Mainly used on the lowland neutral meadow habitat, and it's relatively cheap and easily established. This is something that you can easily collect seed harvest off other sites and get going. It is a double-edged sword. It does reduce the crop for the farmer. It can be controlled, though, by mowing. If you take an early cut once every 3 years, it really knocks back the yellow rattle. You will never get rid of it. It will always be there, but it's a really good thing to have, and it really helps you. It is your friend with meadow restoration. So aftercare of all these restored sites. So keep the sward low in the first year, so that gives the seeds a chance to germinate. You've brought in these seeds in various ways. You spent time and money doing it, so give them the best chance they can. Keep those bully grasses and species, down in that first autumn. Put the stock on. The hooves will tread in the seeds. And keep on top of the weeds, the docks, the creeping thistle, etc. in the first year. Keep on top of that. As soon as you can, in the second year, I would start introducing hay meadow management. Take a hay cut and then graze the aftermath. If you're finding that the grasses and things are getting away in the first year, it may be that you need to take a second hay cut in the first year, just to give them that chance, but keep an eye on it just to see how things are going. You may want to think about supplementing the site with additional seeds in future years. Some, things will take time to get going. Some things will show in the first year, others won't. Others won't show for a few years, to be honest. Be patient. You've got to be patient with this. Don't try sort of throwing money after introducing lots of plug plants and things if you've just not given it the chance. Give it a few years first to see what comes. You may find that one green hay strewing may be enough. You may need to top it up another year. Just, see how the species are going, as I say. Now, just a quick talk about arable reversion to species-rich grassland. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here on that. This is an example of a site nearby me in the Cotswolds on calcareous grassland that 30 years ago was an arable field. And to be honest, I went on there and it looks just like a calcareous grassland, an ancient calcareous grassland. There are a few indicators where you could tell it was a bit different. This was extensive over the whole area. It was fantastic. So, doing this arable reversion to species-rich grassland, it helps sort of unify that fragmented area in the landscape. If you've got heavy agriculture, to have this, sort of joining up the landscape. This was buzzing with insect life, this grassland. So you might consider it there. You might consider going back to species-rich grassland if you've got a site that's under the plough that's got historic interest beneath it. Win-win situation for archaeology and for the grasslands. You might consider doing this on a less profitable area that's under cultivation at the moment. So I've just put a few things down here. Again, it's the same principles as restoration. Consider first your weed burden. If you've got, get on top of that before. If you've got docks, creeping thistle, etc., get on top of it before. Get it to a manageable level before you even start to do your restoration. You might have to delay a year before you start. Once you want to start the restoration, create a fine seed bed. Take advice if there's archaeological interest as to how you go about doing that before you do it. So create a fine seed bed. You can use green hay, you can use harvested seed. If the land's one of the things you've got to consider, when you put this seed down, we recommend that you sow it in late summer to autumn. If it's land that's likely to flood, you really want to get that seed well established before any water starts running over that soil. You don't want it all washed away. So appropriate sowed mix for the soils and areas. You're probably going to be buying this in. So go to a reputable source. Seed rate, as I said before, 15 to 20 kilograms per hectare with approximately 10% wildflower seed, and broadcast it on the surface of the soil and firm it in by rolling. Monitor the site for weeds and deal with them as they come up. So in the first year, you probably will get a big weed load in the first year. You've really got to keep on top of that. And then as soon as possible, as with the restoration, start managing it as a hay meadow. So finally, I just want to talk really briefly about monitoring. People set up their own monitoring systems. What you want to do is you want to survey regularly to see how it changes over time. Do a survey at the beginning to see what you start with, and then that's your starting point. So you will see what is coming in year by year. Keep a species list. There's various ways you can get in there and monitor it. You can do a walkover with a set number of random stops where you perhaps sit down and, as in this photo, lay down a quadrat, 2 meter by 2 meter quadrat, and start doing an abundance of, do a species list of how many species you've got there, abundance, cover of those species. We've got, frequent bird's-foot trefoil, but we have rare knapweed. You can start building yourself up survey forms to do that with the key indicator species that I mentioned earlier in this talk for those habitats. Other things you can record when you're there is you can do an estimate of broadleaf plants to grasses. So that's a good indicator. If you've got sort of 30-40% broad-leaved to 60-70% grasses, you know you're doing well. Also monitor any negative indicator species. So these, again, I can send some forms out that will give you some ideas of what those negative indicator species are, but probably things like ragwort, docks, things like that again. Develop your own survey cards as a group. A lot of Meadows groups have their own survey cards. We have some forms that we've created within Natural England that we send out to people to assess whether they've got any of these species rich type grasslands. And some of the criteria you're measuring on there are things that you might want to bring into your monitoring. Again, I can send out a link to these forms, which you can then build your survey forms out of. And I think that is a quick rattle through species grasslands, species rich grasslands.
Thank you very much, Katey. That was great. I've got lots of questions. I see we've got a fair few come through, and it was really lovely seeing those anthills. I have a bit of a fondness for anthills, which actually kind of leads from some of these questions around the sort of management. So I'm quite interested. Obviously, you get anthills where you aren't doing cuts, because obviously if you're running if you're cutting a meadow, you're not going to have the development of anthills. So I wondered what your thoughts were in terms of management of some of those meadows, if that's the sort of thing that could be possible on your land, of whether you can just use grazing and not have to do cutting at all, or what your thoughts are around that.
Yes. So if you have anthills, you don't cut.
Yeah.
Don't cut. You would do that by grazing. So for those sites, what you would do is you would shut them up over the winter, and on it varies greatly actually. On some of them you would graze extensively, so you'd have very low numbers of stock on there. Mixed grazing is best if you can, so have cattle and or sheep. Having cattle grazing is really important because they really do make an impact on the grasslands. But you do need to give them some recovery time, through the through the winter. You need to get the stock off when the ground starts becoming poached. So when it gets wetter in the winter. If you're trying to create a species rich grassland where there are no anthills and you've got the neutral soils like the one in the picture at the end of my presentation here, you're only really going to get that species variety if you do the hay cut with your aftermath grazing. So you will be probably getting a site that's possibly slightly less species rich if you're just doing it by grazing alone.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think obviously if you've got anthills, you want to hang on to them.
Absolutely.
So we've had some questions around the magic map. And I also wondered this because I think quite a lot of Moor Meadow members have quite small, well, it's all different sizes of land, but there are a number that have quite small meadows, and they may not be farmed in the way that perhaps would lead them to be on the magic map, but they may well have either gone through restoration, or they may be sort of fragments of species rich meadow. And if they've obviously had a botanic survey and that's looking like the case, how would they find their way onto the magic map? So
well, it would be brilliant to get them on there. If people are willing to put them on, that would be fantastic. And we do have Meadows groups who are putting them on around the country.
Okay.
So we've got these forms I mentioned at the end. We have a form that we ask people to go through and answer questions on, and it's basically, which species have you got? How is it being managed? What is the proportion of white clover, ryegrass, etc.? All quite sort of basic questions. And if you can answer these questions and provide photos and details of surveys that you've carried out on the site, which gives us species lists, etc., and send them into a link that I can send you, we can get them put on the system.
Okay, no, that sounds good. Yeah, so it's obviously something that More Meadows is sort of pushing for, to try and get people to look a bit more at their meadows and see whether they've at least got some indicators that might suggest they've got some interesting grasslands there.
Yeah, and
so,
I will can I just add to that,
yeah.
that we do like to have owners' permission to put them on as well. We need that to put them on, because obviously the platform is under an open government license and it's visible to the public. So we need owners' permission before we can put those sites on. So that's something just to bear in mind when you're submitting stuff. You can't submit your neighbour's field without permission.
Okay, yes, that seems sensible. So you mentioned about donor sites, and I know that is something we've talked a lot about in More Meadows, and almost trying to provide a sort of matching system or dating service to try and match people up. We've got a question from somebody who says the Coronation Meadow project that Plant Life sponsored a few years ago identified a particular meadow in each county that could be used for donor seed. Are these sites available for donor seed? Is there a way, if you don't know of your neighbour or whatever, that you can try and find where you could potentially get, I guess, donor seed from?
Yes. So the Coronation Meadows, yeah, I know some of them are used, but some of them are in private ownership and, not necessarily, all used. The best way to find out is to talk to people in your county, like, sort of wildlife trusts or national landscape groups, to find out where seed is being harvested. And it's something possibly that the Meadows group may be looking into. I'm not sure as to where other sites are. And this dating system just sounds fantastic for matching up sites. If you've got that within the group, because you've got a lot of members, haven't you, with a lot of sites.
We do. It's a definite aspiration, and sometimes I think it's worked, but it is a challenge, because I think obviously with the limitations that you mentioned, if you're doing green hay, for example, it's trying to find the right kind of meadows that are within that kind of distance thing. So yes, and we do have a forum that I will generally mention to anyone listening, that you can certainly post those kind of queries and things on. So yes, a dating setup would be great for that. So there's a few questions around dealing with certain species that may be less desirable. So some about weeds, but also somebody has asked on the best advice how to deal with white clover cover when trying to enhance a grassland towards that kind of lowland meadow.
So as fertility levels drop, as you start managing it as a hay meadow, the white clover will slowly die back itself. You don't want to be going on there and treating it with anything to knock it back. Let it do it naturally. You will find as the restoration progresses, the white clover will just naturally die back. You get a lot more red clover, which is good. These old meadows do have a component of white clover in them. So, you will always have some of that, but I wouldn't go around treating it to knock it back. It's just, manage it as a traditional meadow, and it slowly will reduce fertility and it will die back.
I would say there's quite a few questions around weed burdens and types of weeds, and people bringing up that some of those are good for pollinators, and a number of questions about kind of what point do we consider it's a weed burden and we've really got to get in and do something. And there's also some questions about lists of those kind of problem species, but I'm guessing that might be on some of the resources you might send us links to with the indicator species.
Yes,
ones as well, and sort of how you deal with that at scale as well, rather than having to put sort of herbicides down.
Yes, yeah. Actually, 2 seconds. I'm just going to end the slideshow because I can't actually see you. Is that?
Oh,
Do I just end the slideshow?
yep. I think that could
There
be.
you are. That's better. I was just talking to a screen with my presentation on.
Ah,
That's much better.
that's fine.
Okay, so weed burden. Yeah, I'm not going to recommend using any herbicides. Obviously, that is one option to do. I really recommend not going down that route. So I could do a whole other presentation on weed burden, but things like creeping thistle, they can be managed by topping at the right time of year. Get in all these weeds, actually, to be honest, get in there and top them before they seed. So and that will knock them back a lot. Creeping thistle, docks, ragwort. Well, ragwort's a different one actually. But all of those, if you can get in and not cut them, top them before they seed, and keep doing that year after year until the weed load becomes acceptable for you. I agree. Some of those plants, they are important for invertebrates. But if it's all creeping thistle, that's
Yeah.
not going to be any help. If let's have a variety of species in there, and you'll get a lot more variety of the invertebrates. Ragwort is a very different problem as well, and pulling that is generally the accepted way of doing that. So pulling it before it goes to seed, literally get. I know locally here, I do remember actually one of the larger sites that I used to be responsible for around here. They used to get, as soon as the A levels had ended, they got all the kids out and they paid them a pittance to go and pull bits of ragwort over the hills. It's just a
Could be a community activity, couldn't it?
community activity and get the kids earning a bit.
You're worried about that. A few ragwort, of course, it's again a great plant for a lot of
Yeah,
insects.
absolutely. Yeah.
I've got some questions around some different types of meadows. There's a question about a micro meadow and front lawns. So, I mean, the principles are generally the same, but obviously the machinery that you might use is different. But they've done quite well. They have a nice diversity of species, but they're getting a lot of moss in. Any advice? And is that even a problem?
Yeah. It's a difficult one, moss, isn't it? It depends what sort of moss it is. Some of these grasslands have some really interesting mosses in, especially the acid ones. If you get these, I don't know the English, or pleurocarp sort of these carpet sort of mosses, you like pincushion moss. That can become a problem because it stops stuff coming through. But if you've got these mosses that sort of grow up within the sward, that's brilliant. It's another aspect to these meadows. I suppose if you've got the carpet mosses, I'd just get in there and start pulling them out. But the other ones, I really wouldn't get too worried about it. I think it's a nice addition to those meadows, and brilliant doing it in your front garden.
Yes.
It's a lot easier to get hold of the equipment to cut and remove there when getting the lawnmower out than actually trying and get a cut and baler in. And I have one myself in my garden. It gives me a great enormous amount of pleasure.
Yeah, they're good and such an easy thing to do. And actually, I did wonder if there's benefit, because I think a lot of limitations people find, especially if they're awkward sizes or the access is difficult for machinery. There's various sort of problems around that, or just resources, like you talked about the cost of doing some of these things. And I wondered if you've got the sort of right conditions and things are looking good and that you feel that field has got potential, whether there's kind of a benefit of, or I guess a way of approaching it, of doing kind of patches that could spread, and whether that's worth doing, or how long would it take to sort of spread out from that, or are they likely to sort of just disappear into the the general grassiness around them?
You are talking about, you probably have to micromanage it a lot more just to make sure they get going. Take, for example, yellow rattle. Yellow rattle is your friend. Get that in. That's the place to start. And actually, if you have just got, take your front garden, one example again, you've managed to collect a few handfuls of seed of yellow rattle from somewhere. If you just cut back and create a bit of bare ground in that front garden, put the yellow rattle down in 1 or 2 areas of bare ground in that garden, it romps away, and it romps right through the grassland and knocks back those dense grasses. So I would say, if you've not got much equipment, time, money, start with yellow rattle and do that. Other than that, yes, I would start with a few small patches, because they do spread out. You know, it's again, I mean, from experience, I can't get certain things growing in my little patch in my garden, and I've put plugs of those in. I've collected seed, grown them on, put plugs in them, and you know, they're taking its time to get going, but they're there. So every little, trying it, you know, just give it a go, and it over time it'll give you enormous pleasure.
Yeah, and I think gardens are a bit of an easy win, aren't they? And so kind of inspiring, I think, to walk past and see that. So I'm just having a look. Oh, I've got an interesting one here about a green burial site. Which there's a group obviously trying to manage this area as a lowland meadow, but obviously because it's a burial site, they're saying that there's a sort of enrichment from that process, and whether there's any way that they can kind of combat that. I'm not sure really there's an answer to that one. It's quite an unusual question, I have to say.
Yes,
I've not seen one
not
like
actually
that
come
before.
across that, but I will say, you know, graveyards are, you know, some fantastic species rich meadows in graveyards, and you know, so it is possible. Yes, I've not come across that one before. Perhaps you could do round the edges, get the wildflower meadows around the edges. There are some things that will look nice and romp away, like oxeye daisies, even if the soils are a little more fertile. So, you know, if it's just for the look of it, you know, things like oxeye daisies might be your winner there.
Yes, yeah, I think so. Just having a little look down. Someone's saying actually they've got a lot of interest from passers-by with their micro meadow on the street, which is really nice to
Brilliant
to hear, which is good. There's a question. I think you've probably really covered this. So it's in your talk, actually. I know what happens when yellow rattle gets a real good hold, and you tend to get lots of ribwort plantain, because it's one of the things that's obviously quite resistant to the yellow rattle roots. So they don't cut, as it's not economic, but they tend to graze in late summer. But obviously it's the cutting, isn't it, really, before the yellow rattle sets seed. So thereafter, if there's any ideas around what they might do, I'm not sure.
Can you get the stock on earlier? It's all about removing those flowers before they go to seed 1 year in 3. So if you can get the stock on earlier, that would help.
Yeah,
but it really does make a difference for a year or 2.
One of the things I've sort of noticed in the various bits of restoration that I've done over the years is kind of how it changes very much from year to year. And you mentioned that about monitoring it. And I've done quite a bit where we've done sort of experimental plots and looked at things. And going back to that question with the plantain, we've had areas where it has gone completely plantain dominated, and we never did anything. We didn't really worry about it too much. And then it kind of moves on, and the yellow rattle's somewhere else, and that area starts becoming more interesting again. And there did seem to be this general sort of mobile nature of plants moving around the field, which I always found quite interesting. And even some of the sort of ranker areas of coarse grasses, it had lots of spiders and that sort of thing in as well. So I guess I know people get a little bit sort of worried when they see kind of it being dominated by things, but often these things are quite transient, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you first seed a wildflower meadow, you will get an absolute bloom of oxeye daisies. It will look fantastic for the first few years, but in a traditional meadow, you get very few oxeye daisies. You get the odd 1 or 2. So that over time they die down, and then something else starts coming in and starts taking over. you know, they do have this sort of transient nature, don't they? The plants that are coming into them over time, and it's quite often the same thing on restored, were created species-rich grasslands. You get that flush of oxeye daisy, and then after a year or two, you'll start seeing things like the bird's foot trefoil start to sort of reluctantly come in, and the knapweed and things. Meadow vetchling comes in quite early, quite often, and you see these changes. Don't get too stressed about it. You know, just go with the flow of the meadow. If you've got the management in place, it knows what it's doing. It'll sort itself out.
We're coming sort of a bit to end of time, but I did wonder, and it's something I have pondered sort of over the years of looking, you know, at people doing these various sort of restoration things, is you can sort of do that starting from scratch with the seeding, and you do, you know, get, you know, a fair few species established, and it looks great, and you hopefully get some management in place. But at what stage, and we just talked about how you get that transition of different species over time, and that can slip away again quite easily, can't it? At what point do you think, right, okay, we've cracked it? You know, how many years down the line do you think actually now this is like proper self-sustaining species-rich meadow, and we're kind of there, I guess, or well on the way?
Yeah. I guess it depends which point you're coming from. If you're restoring a meadow, that could be quite early on. If you're creating a meadow from arable land, it starts looking a bit more like you'd expect it to after about sort of 20 years. It will look lovely before that, but it starts looking 20, 30 years, perhaps even more. It will start looking like what we would call a priority habitat grassland. So, you know, you have to be patient. It will look, don't give up. It will look fantastic within a few years, but, you know, it's that traditional meadow, it won't start looking like, you know, for a few decades, I'm afraid.
I think it's a bit of patience needed, isn't it?
Yes, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're actually headed up towards 9 o'clock, so that's amazing. Thank you so much. That was really interesting, and I certainly learnt quite a lot actually, which is really good. So thanks very much, Katey. And just to remind everyone that this tonight's talk is recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel. So Katey, you mentioned a few links. So I think that Donna will probably email those out over the next couple of days. So if you've registered for the talk, then you'll get those useful links. And certainly I think looking at things like the survey cards and those forms and things would be they're quite helpful, aren't they? Just so you've got an idea of kind of checklists of plants that you're looking for. So on the note of the YouTube channel, I would say for anyone watching, if you haven't had a look, do have a look. There's over 60 talks on there and videos about how to do all sorts of different things. And finally, if you do have a meadow anywhere in Devon or the southwest, no matter how big or small, and some of these are quite small, do consider adding them to the More Meadows map. So if you click on the website and click on the map tab, you'll find a way of adding your meadow there, and you can add a few sort of details around what you're doing and what kind of grassland you've got there. And the aim is to try and, you know, bring more people together and exchange kind of knowledge. As I sort of mentioned, we've got some events coming up, and I think we are heading towards the 4,000 acres registered actually on the website. So that's meadows of all sorts in all different stages of restoration, but it's a really kind of fantastic way to show the sort of collective power, really, I think, of this community, and to really help kind of reverse the decline of wildlife generally. So a huge thank you to you, Katey, and to everyone else who's joined us this evening.